Hey, Gen Mex, I'm really excited to be bringing you this couple that I met through a friend. They live just north of Puerto Vallarta, and they wrote a book called The Young Expat's Guide to Mexico. I've got it here on my iPad, and I've been reading it for the past week or so and loving the information that's in there. But we're really going to be talking about their experience in Mexico and kind of their experience as younger expats in Mexico. And, this channel is for people. I try to talk to people who are not yet retired, who are trying to make Mexico happen before they turn 65. And there's a chapter in this book called It's Not Just for Boomers. And so that's really what we're going to talk about. And we'll talk about a little bit about the rest of the book. But let's bring Shari and Josh on now. Let them kind of introduce themselves, let you guys know a little bit of background.
Yeah, hey, we're Shari and Josh, and we moved to Mexico in 2018 from Atlanta, Georgia.
Thank you so much. Yes, we do have an Atlanta connection in our background too. I lived in Atlanta too for a while back. But yeah, let's talk about the kind of the young expats, the it's not just for boomers aspect, because why did you decide to write this book? Clearly a lot of older people do retire in Mexico, but what drove you guys to want to write the book about the people who are not yet retirement age?
Yeah, absolutely. We had no intentions of writing a book, but we had tons of people asking us about our experience, how to buy a house, how to build a house, how to actually do the move, how to go through the residency visa process. And every time we would give out information, everyone would say, "Oh my gosh, you guys should write a book." And we really resisted doing it until one day I just woke up and sort of had the beginning of the book in my mind and started talking to Josh and said, okay, I think we need to write a book. But the real reason is because there's so many books out there about moving to Mexico and living in Mexico, but so many of them are targeted at retirees because obviously there is a very large population of retirees living in Mexico, happily. But that's not our experience. We moved here in our late 30s and we see tons of other people doing the same. We have a huge expat community here that is definitely not retired, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and that's who we decided to write it for.
Awesome. Thank you. That's kind of where I came up with this YouTube channel, is that I saw on YouTube, there were a lot of the 20 somethings. So Jordan and what was Jordan? Give me a second here. Jordan, you know which one I'm talking about? Tangerine Travels.
Oh, yeah.
Maddie.
Yes.
So there were a lot of younger people, Jordan and Maddie, I'm talking about you here, and a lot of older people who, are talking to the retirees. So that kind of that middle area was what was missing. So this was great when our friend Sean connected us together, because you wrote the book. I'm doing the YouTube channel. So, and a lot of the same information. And I think a lot of the information is similar when we look across the book in general for retirees and not retirees, but there are certain things that are very specific to retirees and certain things that are very specific to not retirees. And we'll get into that. But I want to talk about it's not just for boomers. You guys aren't boomers. So what is it that you guys do here in Mexico? Or why don't you tell us a little bit of the background of arriving where you are? And I think you said you built a house. So yeah, give us a little bit of your story.
So we were traveling the world for about a year and decided that we didn't want to live back in the United States anymore. And Mexico was where we wanted to be. And so we traveled around Mexico a little bit, landed north of Puerto Vallarta in Riviera Nayarit. Found a piece of land pretty quickly, talking to local realtors, and friends had recommended that we talk to these specific realtors. And it was just a bare piece of land, and started creating what we wanted for a home, and also a few rental units that we could make a little income off of while we lived there on the property.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about the construction process. How did that go? Because that's often something that doesn't go as well. And we're going to talk about renting and whatnot. We'll talk a lot about other things, but let's hear more of your story.
Of course. We got a handful of recommendations for builders, and started making phone calls and interviewing the builders, and then asking around town, which was a really important thing, was just, who knew these people and who had experiences with them. Were they good or bad? And we landed on a particular builder that we really thought would, be honest and treat us well, and also build quality construction. We leaned on, new friends here too, of like what the process is going to be like about building permits and the planning process. And we spent many sleepless nights designing generally our house and layout and how we wanted things to feel, and different options for how it could fit on the property. And finally came up with, our final idea, submitted that to the builder, and then he turned it into plans. And of course, it's not so straightforward. There's still a lot of tweaking and exploring to do. But overall, we were really satisfied with how the project turned out. It certainly wasn't easy. And I stressed a lot. I guess we both stressed a lot. But I was on site a lot. That's something I find important, I think, with building anything is, home-wise, something so big that you're putting so much money into, is being there as much as possible and really checking that the design is getting done the way you want it. Things are a little bit different in Mexico with design and layout and like heights of, say, kitchen counters and light sockets and wall switches. And so it was really important to continually measure that kind of stuff and make sure we were getting what we wanted and where we wanted it. All in all, it went really well. A big part was definitely watching the budget and keeping a close track on that, because we did have a little bit of a panicky moment where the budget started to feel like it was spiraling out of control a bit. And so we quickly talked to our builder and came up with some solutions to reduce that. And we were definitely over. It's I find with building here, but I think with really building anywhere, to expect overages. We planned for about 20%, and it ended up being a bit more than that, which was certainly stressful, but we made it work out in the end by doing some cuts. But overall, we were super satisfied with the final product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's everyone tells you that you have to have patience when you build in Mexico. That is definitely something to keep in mind. But I also think there's this just sense that you have to have that it's gonna work out, but it's not gonna be easy. And you just kind of have to like have faith in the process and keep going and know that you're not gonna get everything 100% the way you want, but it's still gonna be amazing at the end.
But I think that's almost all construction.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. We never built in the United States, but we've, had friends and family that have done some construction, and I was basically born on a construction site. My parents were building their house soon after I was born, and I was around that. And so I think I personally got a little bit of that through osmosis. Yeah, just being there.
Yeah.
We weren't completely newbies to the,
You weren't. I had never done anything like that.
True.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned the idea of like outlets not being where you wanted, and the idea of being there on site every day is really important. I'm currently up in Oregon. We have exactly 1 week left in Oregon before we drive back down to Mexico, down to La Paz. So, you've got boxes and whatnot around me as we're trying to get ready frantically. But I've been trying to run a construction project remotely, and it is just a challenge. It is always a challenge. And as Shari said, things might not work out the way you had anticipated. I've been having an issue with tile in our shower, and you know what? There's going to be tile in the shower. It might not be exactly what I was looking for, but in the end, I think that's something that's an attitude that you have to recognize as necessary to live in Mexico. And I think you guys talk a little bit about that attitude in your chapter about, it's kind of a little bit about gentrification, but it's not called that, but it talks about like accepting the way Mexico is.
Absolutely,
and not complaining about how, in the United States, the tile would have been at Home Depot and it would have all been in stock and everything would have been perfect and it would have just been delivered. It doesn't work that way in Mexico. But you also talked about stress, and that's actually a great segue into something that I wanted to mention here, and that is that this video is sponsored, and it is sponsored by BetterHelp. They are the paid partner of this video. Their online therapists are available almost anywhere in the world by phone, messaging, and video chat. I've worked with a therapist through BetterHelp during my time in Mexico. My therapist is in the UK, and it's great to have someone to talk to who is unbiased and a kind ear to listen and help me through things over weekly video chats. If you want to give it a try, you'll get 10% off your first month if you use my link, betterhelp.com/almost-retired. Over 4 million people have already used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life, and I'm sure that some have used the service while struggling with the stress of a construction project. So continuing the conversation, where were you living while your house was under construction?
We actually bounced around a ton. When we first moved to where we're living, we just rented an apartment really right off the bat. We were there for 6 months. Then we just kind of got a hookup on a really cool house that people needed sort of occupied during the rainy season. So we got to live in that for another 6 months. And then at that point, the construction was
Half done.
at least half done.
But we got the main house. We got the main house done, mostly on the inside, and so we really like rushed and pushed for that to be finished first, at least our like main bedroom, and be able to access the kitchen space. While we had the rest of the construction finished around us for another, what was it, like 4 months or something?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So we moved into the home while it was still under construction, and then we were in a construction zone for a few months.
Yeah, it sounds like we'll be in a little bit of a construction zone. I sent a message this morning saying that these are the 4 things that I hope to have complete by the time we arrive. And with
fingers crossed.
The last line saying like, is this is this going to happen? Knowing that the answer is going to be yes, knowing that the real answer is going to be no. But I'm at least trying to set the expectation of like, these are the things that are important to me. So we will see how that goes. There'll be another video coming out soon.
That is something, you said that the answer would be yes. I feel like, at least our experience here in Mexico, everyone always says yes.
In a very friendly way.
In a very friendly way.
Yep.
When you first move here, you're like, oh, wow, everyone's so ready to go, and everyone's saying yes. And then you quickly realize, yes just means that they want the job.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's going to happen the way you hoped.
Exactly. Or yes, yes, you do want those things. Yes, you should have someone to provide them for you.
Yes.
But yeah, there's definitely a cultural thing with saying no in Mexico. It's not a thing. You can say later, you can say yes and just kind of ignore it, but it's accepted, and it's something that's one of those cultural things that's hard to get used to in the beginning, I think. So
yeah, it's definitely having a laid back mind and just going with the flow and realizing you're not in your own country or your home city, and things are just a little bit different here.
Yeah, and it is great, but it's just, as I mentioned, BetterHelp, it's a great way of being, to,
absolutely,
just kind of like accept the way what life gives you and just kind of roll with it. So
exactly, yeah.
But you guys are young. Can I ask how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 45.
And I'm 43.
Okay, great. And so you're continuing to work. You mentioned that you have some rental units on the property. So let's hear first about the rental units you have, and then also about what it is that you do for money that you could afford to build a house in Mexico.
Well, we actually wound up selling that property. So we do not have rental units anymore. But when we had them, they were good. It was decent income. Our timing was very interesting. We actually finished construction in January 2020.
Ooh.
So yeah, we threw them up online right away. We had about 6 weeks of completely 100% occupancy, and then COVID. And Mexico required all short-term rentals to shut down for, I believe it was
about 3 months,
3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Which was unfortunate, but actually kind of was a nice reprieve because we had rushed so much to get them ready and start bringing in some income. That it let us take a step back and say, like, okay, from those 6 weeks of renting, what do we think could use improvement? What do we need to change? And then we got to spend part of COVID working on making them even better. And then when we opened back up again, it was kind of a little bit of a weird situation. I don't know if you remember, but like when people were traveling during COVID, during 2020, everyone was really anxious, and it was just weird. And at the same time, we got this really great opportunity to sell, and we sort of started thinking about other projects that we could do, and we kind of took advantage of that and sold. And then we wound up buying an older home in the same area and renovating that. And that's what we're in right now.
Oh, okay. Very good. So what is it then that you do besides renovate and build homes? What is it that you do otherwise?
We're both creatives. I'm a graphic designer, and I've actually been transitioning a little bit into doing travel advising because travel is also a huge passion of mine.
And I do post-production work for photographers, so things like working on Photoshop and doing photo editing.
Great. So a couple of things that work well remotely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe you could give some advice for folks who are like you. In the book, you do go through, and we're going to go through a little bit of your thoughts on people who are single, people who are married with kids, and people, I think, who are LGBTQ.
Yeah, so we're obviously a couple. We don't have kids. We've just got furry ones. I think we're at a really good advantage to move here because we don't have dependents relying on us, and we can also, the world is open to us. We can live wherever we want. We don't have to worry about good schools or anything like that, which is a bit of a challenge that we see with some of the families we know, but still totally doable.
Yeah, I mean, most of our friends that have families, they find that where at least we live, because we are in a small town, surfside country, out of the way, but so they're limited on schools. But it seems like elementary up through about middle school works well, and then often we find that families end up moving to a city that have more private school options, which Mexico does have a decent amount of international school options, America school options, and just they're in the bigger cities. So it's not that there isn't an option; it's just that a small town Mexico doesn't exactly have all those great options.
Right, and you also have to think about if you do have kids. What is important to your kids and their education? Like, are you more concerned about the level of schooling, or are you more concerned about extracurriculars and opportunities for sports? As Josh said, we live on the coast, and there's tons of surfing kids here, and that's what's important to them, and that's how they get their athleticism in. So there's all different considerations. But for couples and for single people, I think you have a ton of options. You can live wherever you want in the country. It's a lot easier to find apartments or homes because you have less requirements in what you need. That also usually means that they're more affordable. So there's tons of great advantages.
Yeah, so that is great. I like I said, I love reading the book and hearing some of those differences. Like people with kids, in La Paz, there's a few private schools, but not as many as some other parts of Mexico. I'm sure, like Mexico City has.
Yeah, Monterrey, Mexico City, San Miguel de Allende,
Guadalajara.
Yeah. Some of the really bigger cities, and especially Monterrey, I would think there's so many expats there that are corporate expats, more so than kind of like the individual nomad or digital expats, creatives, things like that. So, so one of the things you also talked about LGBTQ in the book, and sort of your experience hearing from other folks on that with people being in Mexico. So maybe you can share a little bit about what you heard there.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people rightly think of Mexico as a super Catholic country and then do not associate it with being gay friendly, but it really is. There's laws protecting against hate crimes. There's same-sex marriage is legal. Adoption, is legal in most states, I believe. And then there's also like tons of pride events, lots of specifically gay-friendly areas in different cities and different regions of the country. So there's tons of stuff that's going on. Vallarta, which we're just north of, is a huge example of that. And so every year we go to the drag races for Pride, and that's such a fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah, it is interesting with Mexico being so Catholic. But I feel like it's like real Catholic, which the way that Catholics should have been, in terms of like accepting everyone, not really giving, not really looking down on anyone else, just being like, okay, I think in your book, you mentioned that you had some gay friends who holding hands in public, not a problem at all. And I've had other videos, other people that I've met that really found so much more acceptance in Mexico than they found anywhere in the United States, even. So
yeah, that's what we've heard too. And I also think it's part of Mexico's culture, which in our experience, we see it's just this kind of live and let live attitude. You know, there's no judgment about how other people are living their lives. Sometimes that's something that can be frustrating, for example, when your neighbor is just blasting their stereos at you at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday night, and you're like, come on, I just want to sleep. But no one says anything. You know, it's like everyone gets their turn.
Yeah, it's part of the reason we moved here is that
the freedoms of that.
Yeah, neighbors don't seem to be, at least where we live, constantly complaining about each other or to each other, and people do live with what feels like a little more freedom of life, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, last week's video, if you remember that, with Veda, that'll be up in one of the corners up there. She talks about the freedom and how her neighbors are always playing their music loud, but then she gets to play her music loud too. And it's just kind of the key again is that mindset of not getting frustrated, because that's when you can't sleep, is when you get frustrated about the music instead of turning on the noise machine and putting in the earplugs and blocking it out, because it's going to happen. And complaining about it or getting frustrated by it doesn't do anyone any good. So,
and at least where we live, it's not like an every day, every week, or thing. It's usually just during like saint celebrations, birthdays, and just holidays in general. So it's certainly not all the time for us, at least. I'm sure everyone's got different experiences depending on where you live and the type of neighborhood you live in. But we live in a very family-friendly area, and everyone seems to be pretty respectful of each other, and no one seems to be just going all day, every night with parties and such.
Yeah, one thing I'll comment there is there's something called event salons in Mexico, which is pretty common. I don't know if they're common where you live, but in La Paz, they're very common, and out where I live, they're very common. And essentially, people's homes aren't often areas where you would bring in outside folks to visit in your home, because the home is just very, very simple. So there are event salons where you go if you're having a party or something, like someone's birthday, and there's nice event salons where you would have like your quinceañera, and there's some that are not quite as nice where you have just like someone's birthday. And they can be loud often. And that's the one thing like I fear is like an event salon moving in next to me or something like that, just because they're going to have parties all the time because that's their business. And the way like zoning works in Mexico is not the way it works in the United States. Everything is very separate in the United States. Everything is mixed together. So your neighbor having a business, likelihood is that your neighbor will have some kind of business, because everyone has multiple things going on. Hopefully it's not a business that is kind of disruptive like an event salon, but if it is, that's something to watch for when you're looking at houses and whatnot, is what are the neighbors got going on?
Or like, even though the town plaza looks very beautiful, when you go to visit, that might not be the place to move next to the town plaza, because that tends to be where a lot of the celebrations happen.
That's our event salon.
Yeah, that would be our event salon. So there's lots of birthday parties and small weddings and such. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there are a lot of municipal type events with loud music that happen at our little town plaza in our little tiny town. We are a suburb of La Paz, so we don't have the activity of downtown La Paz. But I think when you're looking at houses, it's something to think about, is that things are often mixed together in Mexico.
Yeah,
so pay a lot of attention to your neighbors when you're looking at houses.
Yeah, although I would also say it's all changeable too. Nothing's permanent. So it could be a family living next door to you, and then all of a sudden it's a cell phone store. It just it changes at any moment.
Yeah, and typically it would be a family with a cell phone store. So, people live and have businesses at their homes. That's just it's just the way it is. And sometimes it's incredibly convenient if you've got the type of store that you wanted to be able to go to often. So, awesome. So let's talk about the rest of the book, though. Let's get kind of an idea of what someone, if they purchase the Young Expats Guide on Kindle or in paper format, what else is in there that they can expect to see so that people get an idea of why this is a great guide for them?
It's really got a lot of step-by-step information about how to make that move to Mexico. So from the residency visa process to actually like driving across the border and getting the menaje de casa if you want to move any furniture, personal belongings. It also includes, we do not shy away from
And
talking about...
you had a great story about your menaje, the
Yes.
casa,
Yes.
and how that worked out for you. So you do pepper in some great personal stories or stories of people, friends of yours. So this is not just a, here's the information. It's an entertaining read too.
Moving to and living in Mexico is not boring. There are tons of great stories. And yes, we tried to include several of them in the book.
Well, one of them was, for us, when we were moving, we thought we were doing everything perfectly. We got our temporary visa so we could cross into Mexico and start our residency process. And we made a big manifest with everything on it. And everyone tells you to price things as like kind of yard sale value, or even less things you're just trying to let go quick. And when you make the manifest,
all your personal belongings,
like your personal belongings. And so I had all the containers numbered with a manifest that the number related. So when we got, if we got pulled over or at the border, they checked a random container, and we pull up and they asked us to pull aside, and we went to a very slow border crossing, which was nice. It was like no one there. And the guy though, that means he had plenty of time as well. So he pulls out a container and he looks at a manifest and checks, and he's like, "Oh, all right, well, come with me." And he gives us, like how much it's going to cost for taxes to bring our stuff in. We're like, "Whoa, that's expensive." Like, didn't expect that. I thought because we're residents, we don't have to pay anything, or about to be residents. And he's like, "Yeah, no, your paperwork doesn't allow that." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And like we started kind of arguing with him, and he goes, "Well, we can pull everything out of your trailer if you want to and assess the value of it." And we're like, "No, we'll pay, thank you." And so later on, we come to find out you don't want to move all your stuff immediately. You want to first, say fly into Mexico, stay the time that it takes to get your temporary resident or permanent resident card.
The actual
physical card, that then you are officially a resident. And so then you go back to the United States, collect your stuff. That's when you can get your first round of personal belongings and computers and such, and without paying the taxes on it. So lesson learned, but we can pass the information on to you now for our,
from our experience.
From our experience. So.
That's great.
Just one of the stories.
But that's the type of thing that is in the book about learning. Like, I would have never thought about that. Like, there's a difference between having the first step of your residency done and having that final card in your hand.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a lot of difference at the border.
It's definitely a little confusing, but I think that's where the book can help with a lot of those confusing moments. Shari and I did a really, deep dive into researching all the ins and outs and the mistakes that we made, the mistakes that friends made, and then interviews with other people and their travels, and then also interviews with professional fixers and lawyers and notaries, and getting lots of great tips to help make someone else's move easy.
Yeah, we have different pro tips scattered throughout the book, and that is all really hard-won knowledge that it takes people years to learn and understand. And even some of our friends who have been here as long as we have or longer, when they read the book, they were like, "Oh my gosh, didn't know that. This is amazing to know."
Yeah, there's so much in there. I recognize a couple of names. Yvonne from Relocation Mexico, or Mexico Relocation Services, something like that. So I'm going to definitely be picking through there, and might be poking you guys to see if I can get connections with some of these people. You had a lot from Mexico City. And also I liked how you were able to say like, "Hey, this is how rent works, but it works different in different places. So if you're a renter and you're in Mexico City, it's going to work different than if you're in La Paz or, a smaller town." You also went through the purchasing process and fideicomisos. And so there's just an awful lot of information in the book, and really, and it's all current here, as this video is late 2024. So it's the end of October, and the numbers were correct, and the process of like being able to get a permanent residency is now a retiree only thing. So the process is a little different if you're younger. than if you are a retiree. So not, hugely difficult, but it's a little different. So
Yeah.
things change.
Yeah,
So
it is always changing.
mhm. Yes. So, any plans for a next edition of the book? I mean, I know this one probably just came out recently,
Mhm.
but any thoughts for going forward?
Yeah, it is pretty brand spanking new. But yes, we do put in a lot of information that is current to 2024, and we would like to keep it updated each year. So that's the plan.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Any parting thoughts or like a tip or something for someone who's not a boomer, someone who's
Mhm.
I think boomers technically start at age 60, and I usually go to like 65 because that's like 65 for me is that age where people are supposed to retire. And
Mhm.
my goal is to have people get to Mexico before they hit that magical age.
Right.
So find a way to do it while you're still younger, and there's a lot of life to enjoy even while you're working. So
Yep.
yeah, let's hear a tip or two that you would have for folks in a similar situation.
I think that one of the things is since COVID, remote work is a lot more prevalent, obviously. But we also know a lot of people who are living here, but kind of only remote work a little bit, or they can remote work part of the time, and they just have sort of set up camp close to an international airport so that they can travel back to the US or Canada whenever they need to. So I think that that's one option for someone who doesn't have 100% remote work opportunity. And I think there's also just different opportunities for making income here. You need less than you need in the US and Canada. So that's another thing is you could think about if you want to maybe switch careers or something in order to live in Mexico.
I'd say get out there and do something different. You don't have to do what the world, or at least the United States has kind of told you to do. It's so freeing to realize that you can live elsewhere in the world, and Mexico is such a great option to do that. I think my big advice, though, is do the research and ask the questions. Don't just sell your stuff and move right away, because you should really learn if you do like living in a humid jungle next to the ocean, or you like living in such a large city like Mexico City. So get out there, visit the places you're interested in, spend the time as much as you can, of course, and talk to the people that are currently living there. But get out there and do it. Get out there and do something different.
That was really good advice. That was
Thanks.
better than mine.
That is great advice, and especially the planning part, because this is as you say in the book, do as we say, not as we do, because you, just like us, we jumped right into the first city that we ended up, once we started thinking about living in Mexico just a little bit, we landed in La Paz and we bought a house that weekend. So it's kind of, and you guys kind of jumped in right where you are too. So
Yeah.
We fell in love pretty quickly.
We're all part of the Reckless Club.
yeah, exactly. But it works. Everyone is happy, whatever way they work it out, as long as they've made it to Mexico and just didn't dream about it for the rest of their life.
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you all for watching. And there'll be some more videos up on the screen, probably between us here. And then check out one of those. And hasta luego.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Gracias.